Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to yet another episode of Contact Lost, the best Polish English speaking podcast out there, a podcast about competitive Warhammer 40k. Uh, I'm your usual host, Tomek, also known as Tweak. And today with me, I have a very special guest to talk about a very special topic. Um, we are moving away a little bit from like the games exactly, so analyzing games and so on, analyzing the meta. Today we are focusing about something else, and since this is not live, you have already seen the the banner that says manners at the table and so on. This is exactly what we are going to focus on today. So we are talking about minding your manners at the table, knowing how to behave, knowing
Oh
how to
yeah.
be a good sport, and how to show good sportsmanship at the table. And I couldn't think of anyone better to come and join me to do this episode. Ladies and
Oh,
gentlemen, without further ado, I have probably the nicest voice on the internet out there. And I must say that it means something when I say a nice voice, because recently my new hobby has it has become my new hobby. I listen to audiobooks in English, and I'm listening to Stephen Fry
oh
read Sherlock
wow.
Holmes,
Yeah,
which
that's
is
nice. That's
an
good.
orgasm to your ears. It's feast to your ears, and this gentleman over here is the second after Stephen Fry. So
I'll
I
say
hope
that.
that you enjoy him as well. He is I don't know. Are you the mastermind behind Six Plus Plus Gaming, or like founder? I actually should have asked
I
before.
It's a good question. I think I would say I'm sort of the mouth of Sauron character. I'm the one they would send out at the Black Gate, right, to get my head cut off.
Right.
I'm the one that talks too much and does the kind of face work. So Six Plus Plus. Hi everybody. It's Tom of Six Plus Plus here, and
Yeah, I
um, I,
should have. I
no
haven't
no no,
finished
don't
the
you worry,
introduction
don't you
actually.
worry. It's good questions. It's good questions though, right? I like it. It's organic. Um, I think with our team is a 40k team which has been set up for a few years by Chris Tull and Lee Jones, were the original founders, right? So Chris Tull's our captain, I'm vice captain, and we do various podcasts, YouTube, all that stuff, back reps, and we've got a regular live show, that Six Plus show that goes out on Tuesdays, and so I do the sort of voice aspect of that and the talking and the hosting for that. So that's kind of where I kind of fit into things. But Chris is captain. We've got a whole bunch of other people. Davey, John Scrivens does all of our graphics and art these days. We've also got who else comes on the show very regularly? We have Jack Chapman comes on the show. Ed Fawcett is the sort of the sort of the dark side, the evil figure on our show. He brings the kind of the more bolshy sort of assertive side to my sort of soft boy antics. So we've got a whole bunch of people, and we're quite a big team now in the UK. We play very regularly, and so yeah, increasingly kind of I guess involved with the scene over there.
Yeah, I must admit that I have become a regular listener. I was on
Mm.
the podcast once as well
You
when we
were
were
for
doing
our
the
Halloween special,
exactly.
the
Um,
spookiness tier list. Hell yeah!
but I'm in love with the podcast. I'm in love with what
Mm.
you do. I'm in love with all the personalities that you mentioned. Davey doing
Oh, David's a good man.
covering Tyranids, which I
Mm.
play and adore, and so on. But also, it's just probably the best, most organic and natural banter out there. Uh, and I just cannot recommend your podcast enough,
Oh,
or like
thank you.
everything that you do.
No, that's
Uh,
awesome, man.
yeah, especially to our Polish listeners who might not know who you are. Well, I hope that after today they will know. But you guys are even venturing into like the WTC stuff, because I know Scrivo is doing some episodes about the WTC.
That's right.
So
Yeah.
to the Polish listener who is fixated about the WTC, I think that's
Yeah.
exactly the kind of content that we are looking for as Polish players. So
100%.
yeah, to all our listeners, when we have our downtimes, when we don't release episodes, make sure that you head on and listen to
Oh,
those guys, because
that's very very kind.
it's so much fun. It's
Fun is the word. That's the goal, right? And I think that's what we're sort of competitive players. We do get involved. We do all right, and I think we're developing all the time. But mostly we just enjoy having a lot of fun with the game, and with the show and with our content. That's very much the goal. So if you go on the show or listen to the show, it's silly jokes, it's silly games. We never take it too seriously. Everyone gets rinsed by everybody else. It's just a lot of friends having a good time, and that's our goal. And that's that's going to take us onto our topic in a little while as well. But
Mhm.
that's something that we think is very fundamental to why we do this in the first place, and we don't want to lose sight sight of that, right?
Absolutely. But you are a competitive player, like a
Oh
competitive
yeah,
team.
don't get
You
me
go
wrong.
to
Yeah, we
so
we
so
compete.
so is the plan for you, for the guys, to participate in the ITT that is coming up?
100%. Yep. So we're actually taking 3 teams. We've got 3 teams. We have Alfarius, Omegon, and Legion
That's
going.
so cool.
So yeah, really exciting. And so we sorted our fives for that, and we're just starting to prep. So actually, I'm actually running Thousand Suns at Nottingham. And it's primarily teams research because that might be our fifth. We're trying to. It's quite easy to lock down those first 3 or 4.
Hmm.
What the fifth one? I'm like, what am I? We're going to be thrown under the bus with this time, right? What am
Hmm.
I? If I go and play Necrons or CSM or Eldar, what do I want that's going to give me a chance into all those things? So we're going to see. Let's see how I get on at Nottingham and see if I can cook up something that can do that job. And we're taking 3 awesome teams with some great players. Scrivo, who you mentioned, who does his Scrivo versus the World series, that's the series on our YouTube, which is about WTC, which is something that basically, thanks to you and Contact Lost, we know about. I was not on my radar at all before that, right? I was aware
Okay.
of the WTC. I hadn't really followed it the last couple of years. This year in the summer, I think I really latched onto it with your content and was just like, oh, this is amazing. And sort of opening it up and seeing it from a sort of European perspective was super, super fun. So yeah, Scrivo's doing a series on that. And congrats, by the way, Scrivo, wherever you are, because actually Scrivo took first place at a teams event with some of the Wales and England guys this weekend just gone. So that was awesome to see.
Yeah, I've seen the
Um,
pictures on
he's
Facebook
he's
with
so
his
he's so
like
chuffed.
hammer,
Yeah. It's
little
so
hammer award.
cool. It's super cool.
It is.
But yeah, Scrivo versus the World is a series all about that, and so we're trying to branch into that, and I think we might send people to War Masters this year, and we might try and be around to at least soak up a bit of that and get a bit more familiar with WTC as well. So
Mm.
that's the plan.
Yeah, all right. That sounds great. So as a competitive player, I guess you have seen a lot, you've experienced a lot, you get to put what you preach into practice as well.
Yeah.
You also do a series about the Votan, right? Because this is your
Yeah,
faction
that's right. So
with
I've played Votan very extensively over
uh-huh.
the last 7 or 8 months. It started as me being, I don't know about you, I got a little bit of PTSD when 10th landed. I was
Hmm.
kind of a bit upset with the nature of the game and the way it was, and I play Eldar, I play CSM, I play GSC, and I played a bit of GSC, and I was looking at these indexes, and I was just feeling really bad about the whole situation. I just didn't really enjoy it very much. So then suddenly, I read some stats, and it goes, oh, Leagues of Votan 29% win rate, and I'd got some Votan at Christmas, and this stupid little thing in my brain just goes, go on, have a go, paint them and see what you can
Yeah,
do.
rooting for the underdog.
Yeah. I'm a historian of Africa by background. That's my work. So I'm a bit of a sucker for underdogs, right? I like underdog stories. I'm very interested in the history of power, and I always tend to side with the little guys. So I think I can't help but do that in 40k. It's probably a weak spot I have. When something I play is strong, my brain just turns off it very, very quickly.
Hmm.
But then obviously Votan ended up pretty good, right? They got a good slate. They ended up a lot better, and I was having a great time with them. So I've done the Rock and Stone podcast, which goes out sort of semi-regularly. That's with James Marsden of Toys of Mass Destruction and Jake Harding of Vanguard Tactics. So if you're a Votan player, Votan main, like I've been for the last 6 months, I actually have a t-shirt with Votan main on. Don't think I can wear it if I'm playing Thousand Suns at Nottingham, unfortunately, but we'll see.
Bad luck.
Yeah, I know. So yeah, do check that out. We talk a lot of Votan tactics on there, and we sort of always putting out sort of strategy and tactics segments, and Davey, as you mentioned, does a load for Tyranids, so I'm keen to do some for Votan. I'm going to wait and see how the slate affects them. I'm going to do some for Votan. It's not an incredibly complex army to play, but there's little things you can do to make it much easier. And I will, once I've got my head around it, try and do one for Thousand Suns as well, but let's see how we go. I need to demonstrate I know how to play them first.
Yeah, but no doubt you succeed with them.
We'll give it a go.
Yeah. But today, we are not talking about factions. Today, we are talking
No,
about still competitive play,
absolutely.
but a different aspect of it, and an aspect that
Mm.
touches, I think, every single one of us.
Mhm.
We have better days, we have worse days. We sometimes go into events
Mm.
hoping for the best, and then the experience doesn't always turn out the best.
Yeah,
This might be because of our losses. This might be because of bad dice. This might be because of bad conduct at the table, not necessarily ours.
yeah.
So yeah, let's start with this. Let's start cracking this nut. With
Mm.
maybe your stories or your experience. Like, has your 40k experience, competitive 40k experience, been always a bed of roses. I mean, there are a lot of like,
In terms of sort of conduct and player conduct, is that what
yeah, yeah,
we're
yeah.
talking
That's
about?
what I'm
Yeah,
talking about.
yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah.
have all the events that you have gone to ended positively in terms of conduct, or have there
Mm.
been any situations where you were like, oh, that guy is a dickhead, I don't want to play him anymore, or anything like that?
So I think there's a lot of different layers to this, and
Yeah.
I think as you've already alluded to, actually part of how we feel in games is about how the game goes. And there's things we can control about that, and there's things we can't control about that. And actually, that's also not really our opponent's fault either, or a lot of it,
Hmm.
right? And then there's things around your conduct, your manners, and your etiquette, and how people conduct themselves. Now, I would say I think the 40k community in the UK is an incredibly friendly and welcoming place, and I've been made to feel phenomenally welcome from the moment I first started. Right, there's sort of long time players in the UK, people like Mike Duff or Mark Cromwellholm or Mikey Herbert with his events, who when I was first starting and I was a terrified little noob and I didn't know what was going on, were all incredibly friendly to me, and made me feel incredibly welcome. And you can have these games where you don't have a hope in hell, but you feel so well looked after, right? And that's the kind of the new player experience. And I think it's very possible to lose incredibly hard and still have a great time. And so
Absolutely.
the example that comes. So Jay Middlecote, who's a WTC ref these days, does Mohawk Miniatures, incredible guy. We had a
Hmm.
game at an event very recently. Now Jay's an incredible player, but knights are not in a good way, right? And then he hits Votan, who I love killing knights. So we have this game where like the outcome's never in doubt, but Jay is laughing the whole way through, joking the whole way through, teaching me shit the whole way through, because he's just a really good player, right? So even when he's in a situation where he's not going to win the game because it's just the matchup and the meta, he is still pulling all these incredible tricks, and I learned so much from him. So I think the game situations, such as they are, I think if you go into it with the right attitude on both sides, things that I think I see people describing all the time as the worst things in the world can actually be absolutely fine and can be fun, right? But I think that requires goodwill from everybody. It requires a little bit of calm and peace about the nature of the game that we play, which is this crazy, lopsided, ever-changing thing, which is radically unfair, and as far
Hmm.
as I can see will continue to be radically unfair. And that's kind of the point. And obviously the point of competing is finding these things and leaning into these things, and people like to do that and other people don't. But then there's the whole field of conduct, and there's so many different things to this, right? About, how do people engage with each other on the table? How polite are you? How generous or giving are you? Are you playing by intent? Are you helping each other to play the best game that you can, or to what extent do you take that? And that's where I think there's a lot of different little ways you can look at it, and I think you will gradually over time learn what it is that you as a player and person want and need from games. And
Hmm.
I think being very honest about that with yourself is very important, because that gives you your start point. And then I think the key thing is always communicating these things and being very clear with each other and being very friendly. But I think in my experience, whenever I go into games with people, first and foremost, I'm wanting to meet a new person and learn something about them during a game. And I
Hmm.
always feel like if I do that and they do the same, I mean, they will learn about me, because I'll talk about myself for 3 hours, and there's nothing they can do about it, because that's just what I'm good at, and it's gonna happen, right?
They can only whip out the clock and hope that you
Yeah,
respect the clock.
put me on the clock for
Exactly.
anecdotes. Yeah, no, you're done. You're done. And so I think if you come away from games like that, I mean, it's that thing of, you play someone, however the game went. If you saw them again at an event, would you say, hey? I would like to live in a world where everyone would do that, right? Because if you do it that way, you're basically making 5 mates every time you go to an event. And certainly with our UK circuit, we're all in the same halls every
Hmm.
couple of months, right? There's
Yeah.
300 of us that go to the same things. By the time you've done, a couple of years of these events, you know a lot of people, and it's a really lovely thing. And you're talking outside, you're talking at lunch, you're meeting people. And I think if you're playing the game the right way and everyone's doing that, then that's what happens. And it's this lovely growing web of people. And this is how I end up nattering on stuff like this to you, right? It's that gradual diffusion of meeting people and talking to
Hmm.
people. Um, and so I think if you're doing things right, that's what happens. And I think maybe there are some players for whom that doesn't come as easily or as readily. And I think that's probably because other things start getting twisted and start getting involved. But I also think there's moments where we can all fall victim to particular traps and frustrations and issues. And I think, again, this is a mad game, and sometimes it's working out when it's getting the best of you, and when you need to be a little bit more self-aware of yourself and handling that.
Hmm. So
That's a big long ramble. I apologize.
no, that's very good. That's exactly what I was going for, and that's exactly why I invited you because I knew you had plenty of views and a lot to share. So to give it a little bit of structure, maybe let's
Mm,
imagine that we are going to an event and we have everything prepared and so on and so on, and then one thing that I always wonder when I approach the table, and I meet a new guy and I ask, like, do you know what, I don't know, insert X army
yeah.
does? Like, do you know what Death Guard does? Do you know what the Tyranids do? One of the things that I notice is that I start talking about my army, talking about all the
Yes.
intricacies and so on and so on.
Mm.
And there is always a point where in the back of my head there is this little voice that says, "You're revealing too much." like like
Yeah.
how,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
how
Yeah. Yeah.
so how deep, how deep do you go
Oh, it's
with
so interesting, isn't it? So
yeah.
I think I subscribe to the belief that I think that first conversation is probably the one in which, and people will differ on this, but that's the one where you try and give people as much of a heads up as you can, right? The kind of explaining the fundamentals and the basics and the tricks. And then I think there's plenty of comp players who would say, well, I've done that now and I've given them all of the key things and now it's on them to navigate it, right? But I do think it's really important that up front you're very honest about it. But the other thing about it is it's all well and good to say, I can move twice and sometimes I can move 3 times or whatever. This is what I've been doing with Magnus and other bullshit for the
Hmm.
last couple of weeks. It's a very different thing to actually see that, right? And so it's hard. Even I think even warning people sometimes isn't going to fully convey what that looks like and how that works. Um, and I guess you do have the option of just rocking up and saying, "Have you had a look at the list?" And they say yes, and you go, "Great." And
Hmm.
you go from there. That's a totally valid thing to do because that's on them. That's their job. I because I am low key obsessed with this stuff and I do it all the time. And I write for Goonhammer and other things. I'm quite lucky in that I don't tend to go up to tables and not know what my opponent's list does. Right.
Hmm.
I'll usually know what it does, so that saves me time and effort on the table. So I don't tend to need to do the questions. Um, but I think good opponents ask good questions. So you're going to answer those, right? If someone's not going to walk into a situation without asking and wanting to know things. So I don't know that you can give too much away at that stage. As I guess you don't need to get into the mechanics of, oh well, often I will shell this and teleport this here and come and kill you there, and I'm not going to come and get this angle over here. You don't need to be telling them that stuff.
Hmm.
That's the practicals of how the game is played. But I guess the way that, especially with the way that 10th is now, you've got your 6 strats, you've got a few enhancements, you've got your particular set of army rules. All of the key things don't take very long to rattle through.
Yeah, definitely
Um,
not in this edition
no,
compared to the previous
exactly
one.
that. And I always try to think about this as well from the perspective I once was a new player, and I think I would hate to think that there were new players coming to events and playing people who weren't ready to walk them through the basics of what was going on and what else was happening, right? And then I think once you get up to the top tables and the top players, people are a little bit more relaxed and tend to know the ins and outs of what's going on already, and so you don't
Mhm.
need to have those conversations. But usually, when there's any sense that does need to be happening, I strongly encourage it. And I'm trying to think about it, but I can't pinpoint a game where I'm like, oh, I lost because I told them before the game what my army did.
Mhm.
Right? Can you? I can't think of one. I don't
No,
like. I don't.
no,
I don't.
I
I don't
totally
think it
understand.
matters that much. Right? Um, I guess. Yeah. It's. Yeah. I can't. I can't off the top of my
Nah,
head.
no, I think the opposite potentially could happen, and I noticed this even about myself,
Yes.
in some TTS games. Like, obviously, if you like, I don't go to as many events as probably you do, or the majority of our listeners do.
Hmm.
Um, but I do play in like online leagues, for example, and it does happen. Like, we also have like our local scene, but for example, in our local northern Poland scene, we don't really see too many very competitive Eldar. Like, you
Sure.
don't get
Sure.
those, top end builds and so on. You have people who like mix and match a little bit of Drukhari, Harlequins, Eldar, and so on, but you don't have those cutthroat sort of builds
Oh, you lucky
readily
boy.
available. Well, yes and no. That's a
Yeah.
positive thing if you go to an RTT locally,
Yeah.
but it's a negative thing if you go to, we have higher ambitions and higher aspirations, and you need to seek that experience
You do.
somewhere else.
You do. You do. Yeah.
Exactly. So 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 I had a game on TTS where uh, I have played in the local RTT against Eldar. I saw
Mhm.
more or less what they do, and then the guy came in into a TTS game, and he said, "So yeah, I'm playing Eldar. Do you know what they do?" And I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, I've seen it on the table." And so we cut like his explanations, short. It
Yeah,
was
yeah.
very brief, and then we started playing, and he pulled off some stuff that I either know but had forgotten, or I didn't know.
Sometimes you
And
just have to see it, right? You just have to
and
see
then
it.
he
Yeah.
does it like he phantasms, or he does something with the way leaper that is really annoying, and he gets CP for free that I didn't know. and
Oh,
uh
I
and
hate
I'm
the way
like,
it leaves it so much. Yep.
and I yeah, exactly. And but and I'm at that table, I'm like, oh, so you can do this. Oh, that's cool. Oh, I wish my army had that, blah blah blah. And and I start like doing this thing, which is completely stupid, but I guess it
Mm,
it stems from uh not knowing
yeah.
what your opponent does. Like,
And
had I
you can feel helpless, right? You can feel very helpless in those
exactly,
situations.
and
Yep.
and and you get that feeling of, that's unfair, that's stupid, that's, I don't know, but it would have been different had I done the research, had I actually
Yes.
checked the army before. It's completely on me that I didn't know what I signed up for. Like,
Yeah, of
I went
course.
with my army and hoped for the best, but actually that research could have helped. So I guess this is one of those things that you probably
Yeah.
should do even before the event. Going into the event, make sure that you're ready for, the top 5, 6 bad boys that are out there in the meta right now. That you know what they do, you know how to tackle them, and so on. Because
Completely.
you won't get surprised. You won't get that negative experience because you are prepared and you know what to expect. Even if
Yeah.
they beat you to the ground, you
Yeah.
probably could expect that.
Yeah, and this is one of those ones where I think what your goals are and what your hopes are matter,
Hmm.
right? So like if you're let's say you want to get better at competing and you want to win more games and you're like, I want to go 4-1, I want to go 5-0 at a GT, or I want to win RTTs, whatever it is. At that stage, if you've decided you're going to do that, whatever army you choose to run and why you choose to run it, like if you're a snowflake like me and you want to run something weird and you don't like getting your Eldar out when they're too strong or whatever else it is, I've got a Wraith out on the shelf that's not forgiven me for not using him for the whole however many months he was
Oh,
actually
good
good.
man.
He's really cross with me, but I think you have to remember that just because you feel that way, other people won't. And there's always going to be something out there that's scarier and better than your army, or even if your army's good, there's going to be that thing out there that just drowns it or just counters it or whatever else. And the only way you get better at dealing with that is playing against it and understanding it.
Hmm.
So that's something we have in our team now. We have a thing called Kick On, which is when we try and meet every couple of weeks and just have a group of us playing like 1 or 2 TTS games. And typically that will involve, well, let's throw the scary new thing at something and see what it does, right? There's no point not understanding it. We've had tons of people playing new Necrons, for example. In recent times, we had new AdMech out. Um, I've been playing into CSM the last day or two as well because it's like as much as I'd love to avoid CSM, I
Hmm.
need to be able to deal with that. And if you're interested in playing up at those levels and beating those things, that's what you have to do. And so if you look to your best teams in the world, if we go international, your Poland's or you go, national Ignite, right? Those teams are so prepped. They know
Hmm.
exactly what it's going to do, and they're not losing any sleep over the fact it's a bit strong. They're going to go in and do everything they can and get the best
Absolutely.
outcome they can. On the other flip side of it, if you're someone who's playing for fun and goes to events mainly as a social thing, you can choose to avoid ever worrying about what that does in most of your life. So what do you gain? You don't lose hours thinking about it or playing against it. What's the cost? If you play it at a GT, you're going to get smashed. But
Hmm.
that's 3 hours of getting smashed once versus having to do hours and hours of work behind the scenes to understand something. And those are your trade-offs, right? You can't have it every which way. You can either be trying to go in with good knowledge and practice, in which case you got to work hard, and even then you might not make it, but at least you'll have a good go. Or you can be oblivious. I was oblivious for the first year playing. I had no idea what was going on. I was running around with my Ulthway list with Eldrad, and I remember very specifically I went to Beachhead, and if I was the level of clued up in the game I am now, I would know what happened was I played against Ben Jones, who's a wonderful player, playing the Broviathan Iron Hands Dreadnought list, which was a wonderful list. I didn't know
Hmm.
any of these things. I just saw this list. I ran my whole Eldar army into it, killed 3 intercessors, and got tabled. And was like, "Wow, that that
Yeah,
that that was a thing
that
that
happens.
happened." And
Mhm.
at that stage in where I was at as a player, that was how that was always going to go. And Ben was nothing but lovely about it. And I remember at the time being a bit like, oh, I don't like that very much, a bit ruffled, a bit cross. I hate Iron Hands, blah, blah, blah. But you look at it now and you go, yeah, that's all right. Top player playing a top list at a time. And you went into it with your newbie list, and the predictable outcome
Hmm.
occurred.
Yeah, so
And
it's about understanding your own expectations, I guess. Because
exactly that. Exactly
yeah,
that.
if you go to just have fun, you should have fun
Yeah,
no matter what the other people bring. Like if you
completely.
win, great. If you lose, well, be honest with yourself. If you came here to have fun and just play your army because you love your army, great. But if you were hoping for the best results, on an off chance, potentially you could, but
Yeah,
it usually doesn't go like that. And
exactly.
on the flip side, if you, and I strongly encourage all our listeners to either join our Discord or follow us on Facebook, because we do those daily posts about like tournament recaps, and
Oh, that's so
uh,
good.
my
Yes.
son talks about his like thoughts and stuff that he's analyzing right now. I do thoughtful Thursdays, and one of the thoughtful Thursdays that I did was not about like newer diversity and so on. It was about something that I learned from Pumba, who is on the Polish national team,
Mm.
uh, because I joined the Polish national team Discord and I was playing in a scrim, and I submitted my Tyranids list, but I submitted a list that I enjoyed playing, that
Yeah.
looked good on paper. I
Hmm.
haven't even tested it yet. I wanted to use the scrim as a test, but the time of like pairings came, and I opened the pairings table, and like I put everything either in orange or yellow, but some were also red. There was no green
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Pumba didn't aim it at me back then, or maybe it was like a conclusion from the previous scrim that they had. But in one of the podcasts that he did, and then we had a conversation as well in Discord, he said like, if your matrix is going to look like leaves in autumn, so basically oranges and reds and yellows, then maybe you should reconsider whether
Yes.
bringing that list or that
Yes.
army is what you should
Yes.
be doing.
Yes.
Because however brutal that sounds, if you commit to playing competitively, you need to bring something that that can help your team, that your
Exactly
team
that.
can. And it sounds so obvious now that yeah, I speak this out loud, or I
Yeah.
when I
Yeah. Yeah.
wrote the article about that. But back then, when he said it for the first time, it was very eye opening to me that,
Yeah.
yeah,
Of
I
course.
my list didn't help anyone. Like,
But there's
they
there's a
could.
kind of there's
Yeah.
a kind of cognitive jump that happens there, right? Because I
Hmm.
think so many players, especially when they're starting, you play one army and you go to some events and you paint it and you collect it. And for a lot of people, that's what they do for most of their hobby lives. So this idea that, oh, your army's just a tool, and if the tool's no good, you put it in the shed and you get a different one out. That's a long way away from how a lot of people think about the game, right? And engage with the game. But I think that's where teams is great, because the whole team's mentality really helps you with that. And
Yeah.
I've actually listened to a lot of your stuff lately, where I think your argument that 40k is looking great in teams right now, but it's still very ropey in singles, I think that's completely valid. And I wonder whether that's just the game that we're always going to have to some extent. I'm never sold 40k fully works as a pure singles game. I think something's always a bit squiffy up at the top, and I think teams really lets you even all of these different things out, and that can help you to kind of manage that. So I do think teams is a really fun way to play the game when singles is a bit more ropey. um
Teams, sorry to just like butt
no, no,
in,
yeah,
but
you go.
teams, I guess, is an environment where you leave less to luck,
Yes.
because in singles you cannot really predict your like winning path.
No,
You don't
you don't.
know who you are going to meet in the first game. You can assume that the better you do, the more complicated it will become later on in later rounds, but you never know
No,
how exactly it's going to
you
go,
don't.
whether you are
It's luck of the
going to,
draw.
yeah, whether you're going to face your direct counters if your army has them, and so on. While in teams, there is less of that surprise factor, because
Exactly.
it can be, I'm looking for the right word. Uh, Last time I said that you can meander between like the negative pairings. I was hoping to get a better word right now. You can basically almost design your path,
Yes, you can.
because
Yes, you
you
can.
tell your captain and your coaches and so on what this army does well,
Yeah,
what it doesn't, and then they, or you collectively draw conclusions like this shouldn't be an attacker, or this shouldn't be a defender rather.
completely.
uh, yeah, and so on and so on. So
Yeah,
that's the
it's a huge
difference
part of the
between.
appeal for me.
Yeah.
I really like that, and I think that adds a lot to the game. And once you start, the thing is, and this is exactly why the poor Votan have been on the bench, because once you start seeing matrices everywhere you look when you close your eyes, um, you look at the armies you play in that way, and that's something where with ITT coming up, I've been looking at Votan, and I've always had an awareness. Well, Votan struggles into the very top armies, but it's very good into the rest, and it's got things like Necrons tied down. And then obviously we've got this new Necron book, and I'm looking at it and I'm like, I don't know that it does now. At which point you start going, well, what's your job, Votan? I love you very much, but like, where are you fitting in this five? If
You
it's
are
like, well, don't
attacking.
worry, guys, I can go and lose to this, and this, and then you're sort of like, okay, at that stage, I have to rethink, right, and sort of start assessing
Mm,
what my other options are. And that again, I'm in a position now where I've done this a long time and I've got a few armies and I'm flexible in that way. But it takes a long time to get to that point, right?
yeah.
And I don't think you have to get to that point either. I think you can very happily play one or two armies and avoid getting dragged into that. But I think in that sort of collective environment that is the big tournament, there's always going to be the chance that that world finds you one way or another for a round, probably only one round if you're doing that, maybe
Hmm.
a couple if you're unlucky, and you'll get some silly experiences, but you can still make fun of them. You just have to work together and recognize how silly the situation is, right?
Yeah, but the bottom line is, and we've rambled a little bit away from the topic, but so to
Mm.
bring it back to those tableside manners and so on,
Yeah, yeah,
your behavior at the table and your opponent's behavior at the table will largely depend on your mutual understanding of the situation, the mission, the armies,
completely,
the rules, and
completely.
so on and so on. The better you understand something, the less there are going to be gotchas, the less there are going to be, or the fewer there are going to be gotchas, and the fewer there are going to be nasty surprises, simply,
Yes,
or things that you did not understand, comprehend, that potentially could happen.
yes,
So even before you embark on this journey of competitive play, make sure that you simply like speak to yourself and ask
yeah,
yourself
yeah,
that question: what is my army, what can my army do, what
yeah,
can't it do? You know, where
yeah.
it struggles, etc., etc., and so on. So do this analysis. Now, you are at the table, you
Hmm,
are
hmm.
discussing stuff with your opponents,
Yep.
potentially, and then um, one of the things that people, especially the pro players, talk about a lot is that play by intent. It
Yes.
has become like it's the buzzword of
Hmm.
40k today, so to say.
Yes. Yeah.
So, and I think your podcast covered it already.
Yeah,
That
we had Tony Chu on, England captain, to talk about it, which was a really interesting
exactly,
conversation, right? Yeah, yeah.
exactly. So, and you play way more than me. So maybe you could explain to our listeners, the less seasoned ones, uh, what is intent, what is playing
Sure.
by intent,
Yeah.
and
So
how does it work
I
exactly?
think intent in general is a shorthand where the two players are kind of communicating a lot of what they're doing very clearly to each other. And it's intended to stop those kind of edge case moments where you might argue about, oh, can I see this? Can I reach this? Is this charge 6? Is it 7? What it generally involves is being very precise and measuring and checking different things and saying, look, I'm putting this here. My intent is that I've now cut the angle so you can't jump out and shoot this thing. Do we agree that's the case? If they agree that's the case, that's great. That's done. I'm putting this here. My intent is if you try to charge this, you're 10 away. So it's a bad charge. Do we agree that's the case? And so I think that's a big part of intent. Now, like a lot of things, it's quite nebulous, and people end up
Mm,
using it in all sorts of different ways.
so
And
like
we kind of
weaponizing it.
we got into this in the show, and it can become this kind of, oh, I'm going to have my cake, and my intent is also to eat it. Is that okay? Like, it's that kind of situation of like, I'm going to have everything I want. Also, I never meant anything I did wrong. Also, I meant every little, and it's so you have to be a little bit careful and make sure you don't get taken advantage of. But when it's done right, it's both people working together, agreeing distances, agreeing angles, all these different things. And actually, if you play on TTS, it's fascinating now because you can draw all these lines and have these little orbits. I mean, I played Brian Sipe on TTS a couple of times. Amazing player. and you just watch them literally drawing these angles and demonstrating on the board, look, I am safe here, here, here. Do you agree with that? And you're like, yeah, I can literally see it. I've never seen it visualized like that. And so I think people find it way easier because on TTS, because it's a weird half game, it really
Hmm.
helps if everyone's helping each other out. So I think it's become more and more common because people do it that way as well. But in the main, yeah, it's about being very clear about what you're doing, making sure the two players understand exactly the page that they're on, and saving time over any like little disputes or measurements or anything else.
Yeah. So in theory, it's fantastic. In theory,
Yeah,
it's something that we all should do,
in
or
theory,
something
it's
that
etiquette, right? Yeah.
exactly. Um, However,
Hmm.
as you've mentioned, and as I also already said it, there are instances where people try to weaponize it. It feels
Yes.
like.
Yeah.
Um, I remember back in probably that was ninth edition when we had faction secondaries still.
Yeah.
Uh, I faced a Dark Angels player who started the game saying something along those lines. Unless I say differently,
Ah,
my
yeah.
army is permanently in Devastator Doctrine,
Yes.
and unless I say differently, I they had the secondary where they need to basically sit in the
Yeah. Yeah.
deployment
Yeah.
zone on
Yeah.
the objective and just
Stubborn
scar it, scar it, scar it.
defiance. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. So
I
he said,
don't miss that.
so yeah, neither do I. But he said something along those lines. So yeah, I'm always in Devastator Doctrine, and unless I say differently, this unit here always does the action.
Mm.
How do you feel about that? How would you feel about that?
So
And is that intent or is that just
I think
shortcut?
that is intent, right? Because that's saying this is my plan, this is what I'm going to do, and it's that shorthand again. We are saving time, and also we are. It's one of those stupid little things that can be forgotten. It's I mean we always have, it's like the picking your mandrakes up in the
Hmm.
sky or whatever it is. It's the kind of I'm going to do this. It makes sense for me to do this. And with all the other things in the game, it's exactly the kind of little thing that gets forgotten when we're jumping between phases and everything else. So I in general feel okay with that. Now, I would fully understand, and I think there are plenty of players that do exist that would say every single move needs to be, accounted for, and I'm not, we're not going to do that. And so I would understand it, but I think that's one of those examples where it's like, especially with things like actions, where it's like there's always going to be something not doing anything else somewhere for
Hmm.
actions. And if you do shoot it or charge with it, then you've done something completely different. So you have said otherwise. So you've broken your contract. So it's fine. So I don't mind that kind of thing per se. Just as if someone brings on a little squad of dudes in a corner somewhere and they've got investigate signals and we get to the end of the turn and they've forgotten to tell me they're investigating signals, I will assume that's what they're there for. They're not done anything
Hmm.
else. There's no other reason for them to be there. That's fine. I'm not going to hold anybody to that. And I think that's where different types of play would come in. If it's going to be literally everything needs to be fully spoken for and accounted for, otherwise it didn't happen, that's fine. But both players need to play that way and need to be very clear. If it's going to be okay, we can have little things that keep it running smoothly, then we'll both do the same. And I always think it's those kinds of things that wouldn't impact anything else. Those are the ones you can do that. Like mandrakes are going to be sat at the back somewhere and they're going to pop up and down. Unless your opponent's shelling them to death, they're not going to be involved in any way. It's not going to change anyone's lives. Now, if your opponent suddenly goes, "Oh, I'd actually like my mandrakes to be on the ground, and I'm going to change this," it's like, well, no, you've said you're taking them up, so they're going up, right? So it's kind of
Hmm.
you do have to stand by your word. And I think with all manners and etiquette in game, and well, let's face it, in life, the challenge is being consistent. That's the hard thing. It's all well and good. We know we come up with some rules, we come up with a way we want to live our lives, and it's what you do the day that's difficult, or you want to do something different, or you feel differently. That's when we find out what people are like, right? And I think so. I think with a lot of this stuff, that is the challenge: is being consistent and fair. But I think with something like that, yeah, you can have a conversation. You could say, "I'd rather just you keep doing it and keep declaring it, so that we don't forget about it, and so that it's all above board." And I'll do the same for mine. I think that would be a perfectly fine conversation to have. I do think in wargaming sometimes we're just a bit afraid to have conversations where it might get a bit,
Yeah.
like any kind of tension, it might get a little bit. If people like to avoid that in general.
Hmm. So at some point, well, when we were talking, you said um, that there are good questions that you need to ask
Yes.
when you face your opponent for the first
Yes.
time, when you face his army for the first time. So we can probably weave in the topic of intent also
Oh,
into
of
those
course.
questions. So
Yeah, yeah.
what are some good questions that you can ask your
Good
opponent at the beginning
questions.
of the game that
Yeah.
help you and potentially could help him or her as well?
Completely. So let's talk about the kinds of things, because I think one of the sort of underlying things with this is what happens in games that sometimes make people feel bad or feel unhappy, right?
Hmm.
And usually it's when they are in some way caught out by something they didn't expect, or in some way
Yeah.
feel like the game's been pushed in a direction they didn't understand and weren't ready for everything else. And a big part of that is just knowledge, actually. And I do think a lot of people end up feeling bad about things they just didn't understand. But equally, there's always a sense of, well, I should have been informed this would happen. So let's talk about world eaters, right? I'm
Hmm.
going to move this far into the middle of the board, and then I can advance and charge, and I can be in your deployment zone. So you need to know, do things scout move? You need to know, do things advance and charge? You need to know,
Do they
do things
infiltrate?
forward deploy? Do they jump up in the sky and come down somewhere else? All of those things which disrupt the normal rules of I move, I shoot, I charge, and which ultimately are what make armies interesting. Let's face it. Thousand Sons. Can you move after I've phantasms? Yes, I'm coming after you. I'm not. I'm not. I'm not. I'm not. I'm not letting you get away. All sorts of little things like that. Um, those are the things that is in, especially in 10th, where I think a lot of armies have this same suite of things, and they have with the universal special rules, there are a very specific number of different things. Can you move away when I charge you? Can you make yourself untargetable outside of 12 inches? Lots of little things, and it's a bit of a situation by situation. And hopefully, if you've asked at the beginning of the game about their army, you've got most of these. But obviously, because different units do different things, you do need to be watching out for it. And
Hmm.
what I tend to do is, whenever I'm going into a situation at a different point in the game, my brain goes, how could this go horribly wrong? And I work out and I think of a couple of different things. And then that usually helps me to remember. So it's like, if I come here, are you going to be able to move away? If I come here, are you going to be able to stop me shooting you? If I move over this way, do you have ways to reach me from here? All those kinds of things. Um, and it's anticipation, right? And I think that's where you can be checking and avoiding getting caught out. And it's, like I say, an opponent who's being above board will answer questions very honestly. I think it is on you to ask the right questions. To a bit of an iRobot quote, but that's very important. You do need to ask the right questions to get the right answers. And again, it's that thing where the higher level you get to, the more you anticipate, the more you are aware of. But it's I think those kinds of things can help you to avoid being caught out, can avoid those kind of feel bad moments, and also help you to learn about your opponent's army, because that's whatever level you are. When you play a different army for the first time, you're learning about it. I always say you're going to learn about it the first time, and you might beat it the second time. That's usually the way it works, right? It's
Hmm.
very hard to beat something that you don't know anything about. So you need to learn about it. So ask the questions.
Yep. I would say, to me, there are like two sets of questions
Mm,
that you always should consider asking. The first one are sort of like the general questions, and those
mm.
is for you, for example. By the way, am I
Mhm.
breaking up? Because I
You
think
you
there's
did
some.
very briefly then. Yep.
All right. Yeah. Okay. So sorry to everyone, but I'm on
Only
cable.
for just a second. You've been
Yeah,
fine the
but
rest of the time.
it's already the second time that it's happening. So sorry, everyone. I'm on cable, but somehow my internet breaks up still. Anyway,
I wouldn't know what that's like. That never happens to me.
but anyway, back to what I was saying. So the general
Yeah,
questions would be about like ranges,
yeah,
doing pre-measurements. So like pre-measure how far your opponent's model can go,
hmm,
and then how far it can shoot. Like knowing the ranges of weapons. Like the last cannon is 48, but
yes,
the bolter is 24 or 12 or something, is crucial. The same goes for
mm,
spells.
yeah,
So. Um, so that will be number one. Use dice, put them on the table to show where
yeah,
someone can reach you, cannot reach you, and so on. Can
yes,
you see me? Can you not see me? All that
yep,
stuff. You can ask those questions. Can you, I don't know, shoot through walls or stuff?
yeah,
And and then there is the second kind of the second set of questions, which if you forget the first set, then the second one is, I think, even more important,
mm,
which is questions specific for your army, or questions that
yes,
specifically help your army. So like,
yes,
let's assume that I'm playing Death Guard, for example. Think of the strengths of your army like Death Guard, and then ask the questions to your opponent, trying to pinpoint the things that your opponent can do to mitigate your strengths, or
Mm,
or somehow work around them. So like if you want to charge them and hold them in combat, the right question would be, can you fall back and charge, or can you fall back and
yes.
shoot? Because
Yeah.
we want to hide our plague marines in combat. We don't really want the opponent to just run away.
Exactly.
um yeah, or like, do you have lone ops and so on. And then it's also a good question to know, like Typhus, for example, he can target lone ops with his spells. So it's probably a good thing to remind your
Exactly.
opponent about. But it's also
Mm,
like, if you're playing against an opponent and you hear that he has a spell, you can ask, like, is it a shooting attack? Is it like
yes.
another attack? Does it mitigate any of the game rules that we know that something should be untargetable but is, in a way?
Yes.
So
Exactly.
stuff like that. So think of your strengths and what gives you an advantage in the game, and then ask your opponent about the things that could potentially, you know, uh, put a hurdle ahead of your plan or something like that. Or
Completely. And that's always going to just mean that you're going into situations better informed, and you're much less likely to hit one of those moments where you're like, oh, I feel helpless. I didn't know what was going to happen, and now I feel like I've lost the game or whatever else. Right.
hmm Right. Okay. Good. One more thing, or well, not one more, but another thing that I wanted to ask
Mm,
about, which is fairly common, I guess, but it's also, I guess, a matter of the social contract that you have with your opponent,
yeah.
is the topic of takebacks, like allowing your
Yeah.
opponent
It's such
to,
a big one.
yeah. And I must say that I've seen, I think it was on stream, and it was one tournament in America where Anthony Vanella was playing
Mm,
someone. I can't remember who. So apologies to, if you're listening to that, Anthony's opponent. But essentially, it was a game where two pro players were playing against one another, and that you could, to someone who was looking at the game for the first time, it looked like only takebacks. Like the guys were literally
yeah.
putting something on the table, realizing that that this move didn't make sense, and allowing each other to take takebacks.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
handicapped game almost, where both players had the handicap and they could basically redo
Yes.
stuff and so on.
Yes.
So, to what extent do you allow your opponents to do takebacks, and do you like set any conditions, like
Yeah. It's a good
your takeback
question.
for my takeback, or like?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think there are certain limits, right? And we talk about this in our team all the time. And there's the question. There's two different things. If you're playing a practice game and a learning game, we do takebacks all the time. So when I play Ed, right, Ed's a wonderful sporting opponent, and we'll have a game, and I've got some janky trick I've set up, and I roll a one, and he goes, let's just say that you did, because we're practicing we're practicing the averages. The average is this thing happens. So let's say that we did. Keep going. And when we're practicing, we want to have a good close game that's tough for everyone involved and goes to the later rounds. So we always try and make sure we get to that without any sort of big silly mistakes, right? So that we can see as much of a matchup as we can. I think a lot of top players actually play their tournaments as if they're still in that practicing learning mode, especially when they play each other. And I think that's great. I think if you're both at that same level and skill level, great, you can do that. What I think with takebacks is that, and that kind of perfect game theory of, oh, what if we all just did everything right and no one made a mistake, is if you do that when two players are very different skill levels, it's very beneficial to the better player because they spot and notice all these different things and they get all these different things, and it's not very fair, right? Unless they're literally taking things back for their opponent, which doesn't tend to happen that much, right? Um, and I think in general, both players need to be on the same page with takebacks for them to work. I think within the same phase, not like, oh, I'm halfway through my turn, can I go back and do this? I think that within the same phase is fairly reasonable with those kinds of things. I think when a very obvious glaring error has been made, I often think this with Overwatch, right? If someone's run 10 witches into a flamer and you're like, okay, you didn't see the flamer there. There's no, like, it's just sad for everyone involved to barbecue a bunch of witches for no
Hmm
reason. So it's like, obviously, no one's playing the game where they set out to get barbecued. So those kinds of little things I'm generally happy to be flexible on. I remember back in the day, stuff like fights last was so bad for this, right? People running into fights last and then being, but I think when you're at the top levels of competition, it's entirely valid to say we'll make our mistakes and we'll play this properly, and we'll have it both ways. And I think a lot of the very best players do that. But it's equally possible to play it in a generous fashion. But again, you need to both be on the same page. And I think there are going to be situations where with takebacks, you're never going to have, oh, I made 10 mistakes, he made 10 mistakes. Everyone's happy. That's not how it works. Someone might make 11, someone might 9, and it might be 2 of those 11 that lose you the game, right?
Yeah.
And so it's not going to be fair. And again, I know it's a bit sad to keep stressing this on the podcast, but 40k is not a fair game, guys. I'm very sorry. It's just not a fair universe we live in. It's very fun. It's very weird and wacky, but we aren't going to get that glorious sort of egalitarian sunrise here. I don't think in this game. That's not how it's going to go.
It's down to us at the end of the day, right?
Exactly.
How we want to go about it. To be perfectly honest.
Yeah.
So I know players. So, like, if I do something stupid, like again, putting something in front of the Redeemer with all the flamers.
Oh no, not the Redeemer.
Yeah, or stuff like that. And I do get killed. I did have that situation where an opponent asked, like, "Would you like to take that back?" And it deep in my heart, yes. But I said no. Listen, I won't learn if I don't actually suffer.
And that's the risk, right? I think sometimes mistakes are crucial. So first ever game playing Elder when I was a little newbie, and I got nine Dark Reapers out from behind a wall, and I shot them, and I forgot to fire and fade, and I went on and did something else.
Sweet.
And 9 Dark Reapers got obliterated, right?
Aww.
And the guy was like, "Do you want to fire and fade them back?" And I was like, "Nope, because I am not going to forget this." And I got completely destroyed, and I never forgot to fire and fade ever again, right? And so it's those things where, again, it's a funny story. It's just a game. And you can learn an awful lot from those mistakes. And actually, some people learn much better by having that tough game or that tough memory in your head. So again, I had a practice game today into new Necrons, and I played a couple of things, in my opinion, not quite right. And I learned so much more by doing that and playing through and seeing what those things were, right? And so you learn very important lessons for next time. So you don't want to try and live in a world where you don't make mistakes. You don't want to try and live in a world where you just always can get out of whatever thing that you did. And I do think you need to be careful. Again, you don't want to be in a situation where someone's just taking a lot and not giving you very much, right? They're getting to correct all their little things. They're making you stand by any decision that you make. That doesn't feel good, and that's not in the spirit of it. But there can definitely be easy, simple moments to be nice and be generous and help someone out, especially in situations where the game's not even on the line at any point, right? It can be these facile little things that it's not that important.
All right. I have one more thing. I mean, I have a couple, but I'll ask one more thing from me, and then we can jump to our listener
let's
questions,
do it.
because
great.
they do cover some of the things that I wanted to ask about.
Oh, amazing. Anyway. Yeah.
So one more thing about like manners at the table and proper behavior at the table is playing with and managing the clock.
Oh God.
So many new players, especially who come to tournaments, might not be used to might not have the experience of playing with a clock at all. Like not everyone has a chess background, but also not everyone has this sort of cutthroat, again, competitive tournament attitude. And suddenly your opponent takes out the clock and says, "We're playing this. The tournament demands it that we play on a clock." So have you been there, and how do you feel about playing the clock? And does the clock add like extra pressure to you, or is it actually something comforting that helps?
So I don't love clocks, and I say this as someone where I play very fast. I'm very fortunate in that sense. I play very quickly, and the number of when I was playing GSC, people would put me on a clock and they would time out, and I'd be like, "Do you want some of the GSC time? Is that what you want? You did this to yourself, but the GSC are going to help you out now. Look at me with my 120 dudes, and someone can't keep up. Okay, that's fine." But I don't mind it. I'm pretty quick, and I understand the concern. I understand the weaponizing of time and the playing slow and timing people out. We don't want those situations, right? And so something I'll often say, especially if I'm playing something quite hoardy, because that's when people worry, right? They see a bunch of models and they go, "Oh, I'm worried this is going to take forever, and you're gonna eat my time." I will always reassure my opponent at the start of the game. We're getting the 5 turns here, especially like a situation like your opponent's on end of turn, right? Like that can be really stressful because they know they need more points at the end, and actually the way the shape of the game goes, they will be hard done by if they don't get that final round. I never let someone in that situation not get to the crucial bits, right? But again, I'm fortunate as much as I can play quickly and get things done, but I do reassure people with that. I think at the top levels, I think you need clocks in as much as it smooths out any risk of that kind of that risk of weaponizing of time. And I've seen endless examples of people being very generous with clock time. And actually, once you get to the end and there's all the extra time, they're happy to do that. I remember, again, Brian Sipe, who I just really, really like. You know, he got to the semifinals or whatever it was at one of the big GTs and his opponent timed out and he just gave them the time they needed and he ended up losing that game. I think it's another situation where you find out who you are in those moments, right? When you get to that moment. I had a classic game against a mad lad on Tau with a triple Storm Surge, 120 crew, insane game. And we got to that point where he timed out. And it's like, it's a draw if he doesn't time out. So let's get the draw. The draw is a good story. That's where we're at. You've earned that. We've had a great game. Let's do that, right? But that's where I think for a lot of players in those moments, the actual outcome and the rules are less important. You know, it's not the important thing there. But I think having the clock there as the insurance does protect you from that situation of being slow played. I think the fortunate thing if you're a newer player is if you play someone good, being slow played by them ain't going to be your problem, right? that's not going to be how that one goes. It's going to feel a lot like being fast played. So I don't think this one bothers or applies to new players quite so much. It's often when you get to those kind of upper middle levels where you start breaking through into some of those tougher games. That's where some of these situations will happen. I do think practicing with the clock is good. I do think being able to play your army quickly is an important staple of playing tournaments. I think that's something that you get better at the more that you do. For your first couple of events, you might well not finish all your games, and that's okay. And you can be very heads up about that. But if you are playing someone who's taking the event very seriously, I think being very honest about where you're at as a player is important, and then they can make the appropriate decisions in and around that, and you can communicate together, right? They're interesting things, and I do, as I say, there's something in the GSC player in me, just my hackles rise when people get clocks out. I'm like, what are you saying, man? What are you saying? You saying I'm here to swindle you?
I mean, you always assume good intentions, right? So
yeah, I like to. Yeah,
it should be like that, but it's not always.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So listen, one of the questions. I mean, let's start with a very simple question from
sweet. Let's go.
From our listeners. So one is from Nibla, so that's our like regular listener.
Yeah.
And so that's a little question with a little wink there. Which is more painful, when you throw a lot of ones or when your opponent throws a lot of sixes? Which hurts more?
I think it's the ones. Especially it's when you're hitting on twos. I don't mind rolling ones when I'm shooting some bang average unit. It's when you've got your big guys going in with his big axe and you roll like 4 ones. That's devastating. My favorite story when I was first learning 40k, I was teaching my mate 40k. He'd never played it before, and he borrowed my Drakari, and he had 5 Incubi and a transport, and his transport dies. So I go, okay, so what happens now is we roll a dice, every one, dead Incubi, all 5 ones, and you're just like, I am so sorry, because that has never happened ever in my entire life, ever, but I'm afraid they're all dead. And it's so bad.
It's so crushing.
It's so bad.
Heart-wrenching sort of experience. Yeah. So actually, to build up on that, Nibla actually had another question that I will get back to in a moment. But Joker, so my usual co-host, Michal, also has a question. And this is on the topic of dice, and he asks how to keep composed when dice spike in your opponent's favor, be it you failing saves or them passing hideous amounts of feel no pain, for example. Is it okay to whine or get frustrated at the dice themselves, or is that crossing the line in your opinion?
So this is a really interesting one. So the first thing to say is, are you one of those people who has a full and objective account of all variants across an entire 3-hour game of 40k? Because if you are, then what I like to do, and I don't think that I do, but I don't think I'm a mile off. If I feel like a game has had a particular sway of luck in one direction or another, I will talk about that at the end of the game, after I have said well done to my opponent and after we've agreed on the result. At the end, we can then say, if someone said, oh, actually the dice were very heavily one way or the dice were another, then we can talk about it. And often what you'll find is they will agree, right? If they've had a really rough time on the dice or you've had a really rough time, you can laugh and joke about it afterwards. I think in game, complaining about the dice and the luck can be quite a negative and stressful thing for your opponent. I think it can get quite hard, depending how you do it. If you're laughing and joking about it, fine, right? There's ways of recognizing these things without it being like a sort of woe is me situation. In our team, we have a joke that I never complain about dice, and I also get ridiculous luck. That's just how it works. Like that's just I've always had quite good dice, and I don't like to complain about it. You get these incredible moments. I think the time to talk about them is after the game, and you can talk about the ways in which variance affected it. I'm fairly relaxed about dice in as much as it's a dice game, and variance is kind of the point of them, and that's what they do. That's their job. They know, and there's a certain risk in falling into that. Well, on average, this does this. On average, this does this. It's like, yeah. But it doesn't just do that, does it? It sends you to the dice, and the dice are going to do something fickle one way or another. And we try and load it X, Y, Z ways, and we try and stack it all in our favor. But they are there to introduce that chaotic element. And so for me, I find it funny. Like I said, we had a game the other day. Void Dragon runs into Magnus, does no damage. Magnus kills him in one go, and you're like, that's just really funny. I'm sorry, it's just a very funny situation. Incredibly unlucky, very funny situation, and everyone involved just has to laugh at that situation. And then after the game, you go, that's the moment in the game. Because if Void Dragon goes through Magnus, I lose the game. It's that kind of epic. That's where the dice genuinely just decide a situation.
Yeah, but I must admit to a couple of things. First of all, I must admit that I was way happier a player, and I enjoyed the game way more when I was this sort of happy-go-lucky player who believed that my army is just great, even if it wasn't. But I just love my army.
Yep, absolutely.
And when I went into games believing that I will spike in the positive way and defeat my opponent like that.
Those optimistic shooting attacks.
Exactly. I was way happier then than when someone used the word statistically for the first time.
I'm with you.
And I actually started using it. Like the word statistically infuriates me because many a time I start thinking during the game, like, well, statistically, I should have rolled better. Statistically, I had a plan, I had a tactic, I had the whole battle in my head, but I'm losing because I am not rolling statistically, and it becomes like drills into your brain, and I hate that. I wish I could go back in time and just
I'm totally with you.
Remove that word
I'm
completely
totally
from
with you.
vocabulary.
And so I try to avoid putting too much stock in that and overthinking that and thinking. I try to avoid that perfect map of what are the exact average outcomes, because I just think it's a bit of a trap, and it's one that can lead to you getting very mentally frustrated, as you say. And so allocate damage based on vibes, guys, is my advice. That's what I like to do. But it's interesting. It's a tricky one, and I do think you can talk about variance with your opponent in ways that are funny and are fine. But that, we've all played that opponent where they're getting very irate and they're getting sulky and they're frustrated, and it just creates a situation where you just feel very down and uncomfortable, because ultimately you've both played a dice game and you've rolled some dice and the dice have produced outcomes, which is kind of what everyone signed up for,
Yep. And again, I said I need to admit to a couple of things. So
hey, we can all do it. I've had moments where dice have betrayed me. I almost won my first GT this year, and then last year, sorry, and then a Caladius grav tank soloed a bunch of acolytes in melee combat, and I lost by like 2 points, right? And so I was crushed. I was absolutely crushed in that moment, and that's partly about variance, but it's actually really, when you boil down to it, it's about a bunch of other things I could have done that would have never meant that moment mattered, and I didn't do those things. And so you're frustrated and you're angry, and so I was like, I need to go outside and just cool off. Got to get myself together, and then I'll be fine. And in the end, it's all fine. So I fully get it. In the most extreme moments, it can happen. But it's often with a bit of distance from the situation, it's easier to say. If you do find yourself getting what we call it tilted, right? You get a bit wound up, you get a bit upset. I think often the most important thing you can do is just say to your opponent, I'm feeling a little bit stressed and wound up right now. Just going to give myself some time. Going to cool off. I'll come back. And then they know it's nothing personal to them, and you're managing yourself, and it's okay.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I wanted to admit. I don't know, maybe it's because of like, and I don't know, I'm just guessing that it's because of like low self-esteem. But
Mm.
when I play the game, I use the game as sort of like demonstrating that I'm not a scrub.
Of course.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like playing with toy soldiers actually does it.
Yeah.
But
We invest
uh,
in this stuff, right?
we
Hugely.
invest in
Yeah,
this
we
stuff.
do. Yeah.
So that's what happens. And then when, for example, the dice don't go my way, I tend to get irritated. And I guess Joker has been on the receiving end of that a couple of
Oh yeah.
times. Maybe this
Yeah.
is also why he's asking the question. I'll ask him later if our answer actually satisfies him. But I was in a game in TTS where the dice were horrible. Like
Mm,
that's
mm,
a theme for me, but that's not the case.
mm.
That in that one game the dice were going horribly.
Yeah.
And I really like complained openly that that this is, especially that like I it seemed like the number of ones that I was getting was equaled by his number of sixes. And
Mm,
at
mm.
the end of the game, he apologized to me for my
Yeah.
rolls, which
It
is
happens. It does.
a bad thing in itself that I push my opponent into doing that. But again, that's
No,
a
but
different story.
you can sympathize, right? People do sympathize. I think
Yeah,
if you see someone is just nothing they're trying to do is working out for them, you do feel for them in the game.
yeah. So at some point when I said openly that, oh, fuck those dice and so on, he was like, yeah, dude, but you need to realize I'm not doing that, right? It's the game.
No, it's the game.
And
Yeah, exactly that.
again, it was simple but firm, and simple but very to the point. Like, it's not
Exactly right.
your opponent's fault that your dice
No,
roll shitty. And that
no,
was,
no, exactly that.
I felt horrible at that moment because I
Yeah.
actually pushed him to saying that.
And
Um,
that's where the amount that we care about the game can at times be a little dangerous because we get so sucked into it. We care about it so much. I remember, as I say, I was talking about when 10th came out and all these armies were just nuts. I was absolutely livid. I was really angry and frustrated about it, and I was complaining about it a lot. And I was a very negative presence in our sort of team chat and stuff. And then I wanted time out the game and all these other different things. And then it's one of those moments where you step back and look at it and go, yeah, I'm definitely way too close to this at this moment in time, right? I need to be stepped back from this and remember, what am I actually doing? I'm playing lovely games with a bunch of humans, and they're very silly games, and that's okay. But I think it's very natural to get sucked into it in the moment. And I think all we can do is recognize when we have, and then try and make it right afterwards, right? No one's saying never get it wrong, never make mistakes. I think it's being able to own up to it and apologize, whatever else. I think that's the key thing.
yep.
And it's tricky with mental health stuff as well. I think it is tricky. It's genuinely tricky if you're in a sort of slightly anxious state, or you're feeling a little bit wound up for other things, or you're tired. That's when we're vulnerable.
Yep. So I ended my last three games saying, I'm very sorry. I love you. I love our interaction.
yeah,
I just hate the game.
yeah. Exactly that. And that's it. And that lets them know, all the human side of it is still positive, right? That's great.
Exactly. Right. Going on to the next question, or going back to Nibla.
Mm.
Well, he's asking about playing on intent. Do
Mm-hmm.
you have any not nice experiences when you don't play on intent? Or
Oh, so
like,
as in playing without it, as in
yes.
playing. No, honestly, no, not really. I think intent to me is still this thing where if someone says we're going to do it, cool, and if they don't, I'm happy to play by whatever they play. I think some of the toughest experiences I had were when I was a newer player, and the things in the game I understood were less. And so there's just so many more moments where you get caught out by things, or someone tells you something, or that classic early new player thing where someone actually got their rule a little bit wrong, but you're new, you don't know their rules, so you don't know, and then about 2 weeks later you're like, actually that's not how that even works, and I've been slightly misled. All of that stuff happens from time to time when you don't know a lot. And I think increasingly, because I play the game an awful lot and have a good knowledge of it, I don't find myself caught out. And actually, to be honest, when I am, I'm delighted, because I'm like, oh damn, that's awesome, that's a cool trick, nice, whatever, do some cool play.
Hmm.
I'm all on board with that. I think you can go fine without intent or with it. Actually, I think the toughest is when you get like a half intent, a little bit of intent, a
Hmm.
little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of takebacks, and then someone halfway through a game gets the scent of victory, and then that stuff all stops.
Intent goes away, and
because the consistency, it's when people fail to be consistent. You can be a stone cold killer if you're consistent. I'm here for it. You can be the loveliest, fluffiest, cuddliest person in the world. If you're consistent, I'm here for it. Don't switch from one into the other halfway through a game, right? That's where I think you need to be careful. For sure.
Totally. All right, another question, very interesting one. I have no idea what the situation is like in the UKTC
Okay.
when it comes to this topic, so I'll just shoot.
Okay.
Is it allowed to drink alcohol, and how do you feel about your opponent drinking or, being maybe not perfectly sober?
Yeah, this is a great question. So there absolutely is alcohol at events. It's very common. People do drink at UK events. And fun story, the first time I ever met Typhus, I was playing the Leicester semi-final. He was refereeing. I had never got to a semi-final before, and I was delirious and exhausted and absolutely going to lose, and I had no idea what was going on. And I think I actually took a sip of Typhus's beer, which was outrageous. I had no idea who he was, incredibly rude. And I then saw him all these months later, and I've learned all about Poland and contact lost, all these different things. And I was just like, oh my God, what have I done? And I saw him at a UK event. I was like, I need to buy you a beer. I feel absolutely mortified about taking a sip of your drink during the semi-finals. I don't think I even asked. I was just so fried and stressed.
That's drinking celebrities beer is not
That's
a
it,
crime.
and you're like, fuck, that's like the godfather of Polish 40k, and I'm fucking, oh dear, what have I done?
Easy. Now you're a celebrity, so now you
I
can
wasn't
potentially be in
then.
the same
I
situation.
wasn't then. I was a scrub back then. Oh man, and so there is alcohol. So I think this is an interesting one, and this is where again there's goals and there's capabilities, and it differs person to person. Obviously, never get. I don't like it. You don't want to be so drunk that you can't function in a room and in a social environment. That's not good for 40k. That's a bit intimidating, a bit upsetting, a bit distressing, and it's dangerous as well. Especially with cars and other things involved. You've got to be careful with your driving, everything else. A few drinks, I think, can be absolutely fine and can be a lot of fun, and you get plenty of players who do that. I think it does mean there's always risk of sloppiness with rules and other things, which won't necessarily matter if two people are both relaxed about it, but would if they're not. The other thing I think with this is that you need to be, very careful that you're not putting yourself into a position where you're just a bit antisocial and a bit unfunctional. But I think loads of people can have a couple of beers and play a game. I'll often have like one at the end of a three game day. I think that sort of point I absolutely will. My brain, incidentally, as soon as I have alcohol, whatever it is that does 40k, it's just like, nope, you're on your own. That's it. Like, I just can't shoot things. I can't hurt things. I don't know what damage is. So I stay away from drink generally when I'm playing. But there's players out there who can absolutely put them away and still really smash people. So I think it's okay. I think just like all things, be careful with it. Be moderate with it. Don't get yourself in a situation where you're embarrassing yourself or other people or making people feel intimidated or anything else.
Yeah,
and it's a long day too, and hydration is actually a real killer in 40k events. So if you start early, make sure you're drinking a lot of water as well.
Yeah, alcohol doesn't help that.
It really doesn't, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But also one of the arguments that we had a situation in Poland, like, I don't know, half a year ago or something like that, when I think a player got red carded for misconduct or bad conduct of the event.
Okay.
Partially, I can't remember if alcohol exactly was involved, but there was like someone misbehaved. And by the way, to all our listeners, I don't want you to get the impression like 40k is antisocial and like we're
Oh God, no.
we're dragging out those bad experiences to talk about it because it's
No, exactly.
an episode focused on manners at the table and
these
good
are the
behaviors.
extremes, right? These are the
But
edge cases.
yeah, but this is not what day to day 40k looks like.
Oh
So
no, not at all.
just explaining that really quickly. So there was a guy who behaved badly. I think it was towards Pumbaa and so on and so on. When he even started like threatening with violence to other players, to the ref and to Pumbaa, who was his opponent. And this guy got just red carded and then banned from tournaments, I think, for a year and so on. So he started tilting. I don't know what the reason was, but and this is connected to the next question, or like leading into the next question from Josh. If such a thing happened, to what extent should we as a community allow the players to sort this out themselves? And when do we call the TO? Like,
I think as soon as
or the ref?
as soon as you've got shouting, I think as soon as you've got any kind of threats, I think at that stage it's everyone's issue, right? Because I think at that stage it's broke. The social contract between the players has been broken, and there's a risk of genuine, harm to people,
Mhm.
whatever way that goes. And I do think making threats to people is exactly at the point at which point, for whatever the long term view of sorting someone out and rehabilitating them, whatever else, that's the different conversation. For that event, that's the end of your journey, right? If you're going to be threatening people, you're not part of that community, you're not part of that environment, you can't be there. And I think it is a TO's responsibility at that stage to sort it out. But what they can't do is sort it out if they don't know it's happening. So it's imperative that something like that gets reported quickly, I think.
Mhm. Yep.
So I would
Also,
say get people involved, and also I think like all sort of incidents of people being shouted at, if more people step in and stand up for people, it prevents it going any further, right?
yeah.
I think in that sense, this isn't, I think I don't think anyone in these environments is really going to act on anything like that, but it definitely
Mhm.
just helps know the person that's being shouted at is backed up, and keep an eye on them and everything else.
Yeah, and something that summarizes this, both the I don't know, threats of violence, but also the misuse of alcohol and like drugs and stuff, if that happens, was an opinion of one of the players who, um, like there was a big discussion like how to treat that player, because on one hand
Mm.
nobody wanted to go too harsh, set a
Yeah,
precedent and so on, but on the other hand, like the rules weren't clearly stated, like how to treat players who behave like that,
yeah,
back,
yeah,
half a year ago. So it was sort of like working out the rules, but also trying to figure out how to treat this particular person.
yeah.
And one of the arguments that I found really good, that came from a player who is also a father who brings his son to events, and
Mm.
they play at those events together. His son is underage, but already like a prodigy, huge prodigy in the local scene. But his argument was, I bring my child to those events.
Yeah,
There are children at the events. We
exactly.
ramble on about good conduct. We ramble on about sportsmanship, about gentlemen's play,
Yeah,
and then my son comes and sees this douchebag
yeah,
behaving like that.
exactly.
Um, you know, I refuse to come to events if the situation is not
That's
regulated, if
completely right.
and so on and so on. And I think that is like the strongest argument out there,
I
that
completely agree.
yeah, that
Yeah.
that there should be rules, and
Yep.
like you can drink alcohol everywhere else. You really don't have to bring it to an event, but if you want
No.
to, know how to behave, know your limits, know stuff.
Exactly that. Exactly
Yeah.
that. I think that's it, and I think it's one of those things where, I mean, certainly for me, I think I'll have a couple of beers after the games, when we go to the pub or the restaurant or whatever else. But for me, actually, one of the things I love about 40K is it's a hobby I have a great time with completely sober, and it makes me feel good, and I make good friends and have a great time, and I don't
Mm,
need to push it to those other places. When I was 20 something, that was what I was doing to find my good times, and now I think I've replaced it with other kinds of hobbies which are much more constructive and productive. So I think that it's a nice thing to push yourself to just enjoy being in and doing. And I do appreciate, for some people, I imagine there's probably a social anxiety dimension, perhaps, where they maybe don't feel that comfortable in the environment and they want to feel a
mm,
little bit more relaxed. And I do understand that, and I think I can see why that might be tough and might be challenging. But also, 40K communities are incredibly welcoming. Often quite anxious people who want to help and want to do everything they can to help people and be there for people as well. So you are in good hands in these environments, in these communities, and you don't need to turn to the wrong things to try and manage it, I think.
yeah. Another question from Josh, which sort of hits on the same
Sure.
note.
Hmm.
Due to the social and club nature of Warhammer, local scenes normally know who the problematic or emotional players
Yes.
are and just live with them. I
Yes.
know we shouldn't gatekeep, but inversely, just because Jim has been in the scene for decades doesn't mean he gets to be a wanker. How does one manage to deal with the local dickhead or sore loser? Should judges
Yeah.
preemptively warn them, or should punishments be more readily applied to set up boundaries for the
Yeah,
local
this is
scene?
this is really good. So I think increasingly TOs actually work surprisingly hard at this, right? So I mean, Lewis, who's in our team, Lewis Elms runs the Saffron Slam events, and he's in a big chat with a whole bunch of TOs from this whole chunk of England, where they are very clued in on any incidents that have happened, any people who've had yellow, red cards, any kinds of issues, and they are all informing each other and keeping each other really up to date so that they can be very careful in terms of admittance of certain people, so that they can keep a very close eye on certain people, etc., etc. And again, we've only had a couple of problematic individuals in our scene, as it were, over the years, and a couple that were so persistently problematic, that in the end, they just weren't able to keep participating in that scene, and that was really sad in certain ways. And people tried lots of different things, but you do have to protect people, and you do have to take those steps. Now, it depends on where on the scale they fall, right? If it's okay, we've got a salty guy, we've got someone who's going to complain, we've got someone who's always going to try and throw in the towel in turn 3. You got these different kinds of people. That's where the team's element, I think, is great, because you can build each other and support each other up and hold each other accountable. One of the things we did when we built 6++ in the first place was we had a very clear standard for the kinds of people we wanted in it, and we have recruited explicitly on that standard, right? We want good people who also play and love the game and understand it well. They can be good players. They don't have to be the best players, but they need to be good people, and they need to be enjoyable people to play. And that's one of our big criteria, and that's something we take massively seriously. And because we've built around that way, we've now got this wonderful situation. We've got a team of like 20, 25 people, and they're all a delight to play, right? I've got a great team of people I really enjoy playing and would happily have out there representing my colours. But we had to build that. We had to be very selective. We had to be very careful with that, right? And I know a lot of UK teams these days do take that very seriously. Again, your Vanguard Tactics, your Ignites. There's teams out there, War Masters, who have a very high standard of conduct, and they admit on that basis. And often, if you don't make that cut, then you won't be there. And so I think the direction of travel is actually a very positive one, because I think that's where, exactly as your questioner says, that's where the team and the social element, which actually to me is the most important element, can take us in the right direction. But it is also on TOs to know who they're dealing with, be aware and be informed. I think Zach does a good job with his circuit. He's got a whole reporting system, so anything a player does can be anonymously reported to him. So he's very clued in on what happens in games. And local TOs do a great job communicating with one another to make sure they avoid situations where problem players are able to get away with things.
So I need to ask, because you are a lecturer, or
yeah, that's right. I'm a historian. Yeah,
exactly. So you are a pedagogue as well, and
yeah.
So but you also are a competitive player, and so on and so on. What do you think works better for the community? Is it setting the boundaries, also like outlining what the penalties for misconduct will be, or on the other hand, going the other way around and creating, best sports, best in faction, best, I don't know, Renaissance man, or whatever Stephen Box has won over the years and so on. Which one works better from like a pedagogue's point of view?
It's the carrot and stick, isn't it? It's the carrot and stick.
Exactly.
Oh, well, people are very diverse and respond to different things in different ways. I think you absolutely need both, because I think if it's just a world of don't do this, don't do that, you mustn't be like that, then you don't give people anything to strive towards, and you don't have anything to celebrate. Right? And I think our world slips into that all the time, and societies slip into this, where they know what they don't like, but they've kind of lost sight of what they do and what they really want and what they're celebrating. I think in 40k increasingly we are good at this, and as you say, Renaissance man for Stephen Box. I got a best. Zach does best overall now. I won that at Coventry GT, so he's starting to do that. So there are these little awards for that stuff, and I think it's great to do that. I think it's great to celebrate the hobby side. I think it's great to celebrate sportsmanship. I think it's important to do that. And as I say, as you say, it doesn't mean anything though if you don't have a willingness to stand up for and uphold standards as well. You do need to be able to do that, right? And sometimes we've had to make difficult calls, or we've had to talk to people about different things, or we've had to think very carefully about who we admit to the team and other different things on that basis. And those calls can feel very uncomfortable. But and certainly with me and Chris, our captain, our rule behind the scenes is just what is your gut saying? And if your gut is saying this, we've got to listen to it, because that matters, right? And that's what got us to this point, listening to our guts, listening to our conscience. And that matters with those sorts of things. So I think you need to be able to stand up for things, but also celebrate it. Have shine a light on what's positive and good in the game. I like the way you intro you guys now, where you've got your mid-table terror, your 4-1, and all of these things are amazing. All of those journeys are amazing, and they're all incredibly valuable. And you don't have a tournament if you don't have all those people, because it doesn't work. So you need to be able to see the good and the positives in all of those things, and remember that we are one big, incredibly weird family.
Yeah, a little bit twisted sometimes, but still,
Incredibly twisted. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, but a good place to be. And
Yeah.
again, to anyone, and I think we will finish on this. By the way, it's midnight on my clock. I promised Tom that we will do this within an hour. It's already an hour and 24 minutes on
Yeah,
my
it was a
clock.
thing that involved me talking, so you're always going to be up against it.
So we're both kind of talkative. So this is what happens when two talkative people meet. But
Exactly.
anyway, I think this is the point that we are going to finish
Wonderful.
with. So I think I agree with this also, that it's great to like, I'm a teacher as well, and
Oh, amazing.
it's yeah. So it's there is an ongoing debate in the teachers community in Poland. What is better, how to grade students and how to show
Mm,
them what is good and what isn't. um, should you like show them what to aspire to, or
yes.
should you like, don't even like how sensitive you should be, don't grade the test if you check the tests and so on, don't do it with like a red pen because red is already negative and so on. And
Yes.
then don't give bad grades. Just
Mm,
if they deserve a positive grade, give them a positive grade, especially in those like early stages at school, for example.
mm, mm.
Descriptive grades instead of like bad notes or something like that. So,
Yeah.
and give hints how to develop. I think it is also important in our community to set examples,
Yes.
to speak loudly about the good conduct, the sportsmanship,
Completely.
and so on. So, for example, what Stephen Box has been doing, I think
Yes.
it's great. This is something that we all can aspire to, and you can feel that.
Yeah.
You can feel that this sort of gentleman's play
You do.
is becoming a standard.
You really
Everyone
do.
is
You really,
at the
really do.
high, like, you never hear about those misbehaviors, cheating and so on at the highest levels. Like,
No.
all the let's call them celebrities for the sake of the argument, all the celebrities that you hear about, you don't really hear about them having bad time. You don't
No.
hear about them doing bad things, or I don't know, doing misplays or not playing
No.
by intent. All
Yeah.
of them
The standard is
aspire to.
really shifting. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I guess we will finish with that. So here's hopes and fingers crossed that we all have the same aspiration, aspire to the same sort of standard, and that we turn this game into, first of all, a welcoming place.
Yeah.
Second of all, a place where that there is a certain etiquette that we all follow, and it's the common same etiquette all around the world, which I think we are seeing now. Like, if you look at the WCW and events like that, there are exemplars of amazing behavior. John Lennon, looking at you, I know
Yeah.
you're listening
I'm
because John
amazed I
Lennon is a
haven't name
patron.
dropped him yet already, because I just love the man. He's so great.
Yeah. So people like that, Vic
Yeah.
Vijay, David
Oh
Gaylord,
yeah.
they
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
demonstrate what a player should be.
Exactly.
And yeah, here's hopes that we will reach a point where everyone plays like that at events, and we don't have to worry about bad manners or
Exactly.
tilting or stuff
Yeah.
like that.
I think that's the direction of travel, man. I can feel it. And it's a game that brings people together, which is how I've ended up on a random evening night talking to a man from Poland about 40k. Right? That's what this thing can
Exactly.
do. It can create these incredible, unlikely connections and moments, and that's what the game is for.
Totally.
So get out there and make the most of it, guys. Have a great time.
Absolutely. All right, Tom, you've been an amazing pleasure to talk to. Sorry for keeping you here for so
No,
long.
no problem at all. My pleasure.
Just 2 minutes more. Tell our listeners, well, where can people find you? What should
Sure.
they Google to find you?
Yep, no problem at all. So we are 6++ Gaming, and if you type 6++ like the invan save into 40 into Google, 6++ 40k into YouTube, you will find us. We're on YouTube, we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we're on all the different socials, and we have a whole bunch of shows that go out very regularly on YouTube. We have a lot of regular Facebook content. We have on wherever you find your podcast, we have that 6++ show, which is our main podcast show, which goes out live at 8:30 UK time on a Tuesday. So I'm actually on there tomorrow night. We're back talking New Year's resolutions, so you can find out
Nice.
all about my resolutions. Spoilers: my resolutions aren't actually about 40k. I've done enough 40k. I've got other stuff to do this year. I'm just,
Helpful. That's very
yeah,
helpful.
exactly. That's kind of where I'm at. I'm like, I'm happy with this. This is going fine. Let's work on the other stuff. But it's gonna be that'll be a good show. Should be really fun. So yeah, if you're really interested in learning more about the game but having a lot of fun doing it and not taking yourselves too seriously, that's what we're all about. We are flying the flag for the bang average competitive 40k player. So we'll see you over there, and obviously keep listening to Contact Lost because it's actually legitimately my favorite podcast now. I don't know how that's happened in the space of about 6 months. This has become my favorite podcast. Love you guys. Love what you're doing.
Thank you, thank you. That's very nice. And to our all our listeners, you know the drill. We have two sponsors right now: Army Painter and Weyland-Yutani. You can follow the links in the description to get their amazing products, and please do. Especially, in the case of Weyland-Yutani, we get a small bit of your purchases as well. So if you want to support the podcast in that way, then that's most welcome. And we also have a patron where we will be changing the rules slightly. I already mentioned that, but I haven't got down to that yet. But we do encourage you to support us in any way possible. I know that Joker and my son are planning on doing some event coverage, and we intend to buy some equipment. So we are currently like preparing a list of equipment that we need to buy. So yeah, any little brick that helps us build that sort of setup for covering events would be very appreciated. So yeah, head on to our Patreon. This is also linked in the description, and do help us out if you want to, and we will repay with more interesting content. Hopefully you like this one, Tom. As I mentioned, you've been a great pleasure, and I'm already looking forward to having you back in the
Oh,
future.
100%. I'll be well up for that.
Really cool. And yeah, to everyone, thank you for sticking with us. And until next time,
Be
bye
well
bye.
out there, guys. Bye bye.